The door of the art shop burst open before Alina Hartley could turn the lock, and three men in dark coats stepped inside like they already owned the place. She dropped the brush she was holding, and red paint splattered across the wooden floor like a warning. Her heart slammed against her chest. She knew who sent them. She had known this day was coming for weeks, ever since the bank letters stopped and the phone calls from unknown numbers started instead. "Miss Hartley," the tallest man said, his voice flat and businesslike. "Mr. Calloway wants this property. You are 3 months behind on the loan. We are here to collect what is owed, one way or another." Alina backed against the counter, her hands trembling. The shop had been her mother's before it was hers, filled with canvases, jars of paint, and the smell of turpentine that had followed her through childhood. Losing it would mean losing the last piece of her mother she had left. "Please," she said, her voice cracking. "I just need more time. I can pay. I have new commissions coming in." "That is not my decision to make," the man replied. He glanced toward the back of the shop and his eyes narrowed. "Mr. Calloway is on his way. He likes to see what he is taking before he takes it." Alina's stomach dropped. She had heard the name Dante Calloway whispered around the neighborhood the way people whispered about storms and fires, things that destroyed everything in their path without warning. Men like him did not visit shops. They sent people to clear them out, quietly, permanently, and without mercy. The bell above the door rang again, and this time the room seemed to grow colder. A man stepped through the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a black coat that fit him like armor. His face was calm, almost bored, the face of someone who had done this many times before and felt nothing when he did it. His eyes swept across the shop, taking in the shelves of paint, the half-finished canvases leaning against the walls, the smell of linseed oil that clung to everything. This was Dante Calloway. Alina recognized him instantly, though she had never seen him in person before. He looked younger than she expected, though his eyes carried the weight of someone much older. He moved through the shop like he was walking through a battlefield he had already won, unhurried, untouchable. "Miss Hartley," he said, his voice low and even, "I understand there has been a delay in payment." "I can explain," Alina said quickly, though she was not sure what she would say if he let her continue. Dante did not answer. His attention had already drifted past her, toward the back corner of the shop where an easel stood beneath the window, catching the last light of the afternoon. On it sat an unfinished portrait, the outline of a woman's face rendered in soft charcoal and pale color, her eyes only half completed, staring out with a haunting, unfinished gaze. Dante stopped walking. His men noticed the change immediately. The tall one who had spoken first shifted uncomfortably, glancing between his boss and the painting, unsure what was happening. Dante's jaw tightened. His hands, which had been resting calmly at his sides, curled into fists. Alina watched, confused, as the most feared man in the city stood frozen in front of her half-painted canvas, his face draining of color. "Where did you get this?" Dante said, his voice suddenly sharp, cutting through the quiet shop like a blade. Alina blinked, caught off guard by the sudden shift in his tone. "I painted it," she said. "It's mine. I mean, I created it." "Who is she?" Dante demanded, stepping closer to the easel. His eyes did not leave the painting. "Who is this woman?" "I don't know," Alina admitted, her voice small. "I've never met her. She comes to me in dreams. I've painted her 3 times now, always the same face, always unfinished, like something is stopping me from completing it." Dante's expression darkened. For a long moment he said nothing, only stared at the painting as though it might disappear if he looked away. Alina had never seen a man look so shaken, not from fear, but from something deeper, something that looked almost like grief. "That is impossible," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. One of his men cleared his throat. "Sir, should we proceed with the property?" Dante turned, and for a moment the cold businessman returned to his face. "No," he said. "Not yet. Leave us." The men hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances, but they obeyed. The bell above the door rang as they filed out, leaving Alina alone in the shop with the man who had come to take everything from her. She wrapped her arms around herself, unsure what to do. The silence stretched between them, heavy and strange. Dante finally looked away from the painting and turned to her, his eyes searching her face like he was trying to solve a puzzle that made no sense. "Tell me everything about this painting," he said. "Every detail. When you started it, what you remember from the dreams, everything." Alina hesitated. Something about the way he asked made her feel like the ground beneath her had shifted, like this conversation was no longer about the shop or the debt or the eviction that had been minutes away. This was about something else entirely, something that mattered to him far more than money. "I started painting her about 2 months ago," Alina said carefully. "I woke up one night and the image was so clear in my mind, I had to get it down before it faded. She has dark hair like in the painting, and there's always a garden behind her, though I never finish that part. Every time I try to complete her eyes, I wake up before I can see them clearly." Dante's hand rose slowly, hovering near the canvas but not quite touching it, as though he were afraid contact might shatter something fragile. "She looks like my sister," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "My sister Isabel, she died 3 years ago. The official report said it was an accident." Alina's breath caught. "I'm so sorry," she said, and she meant it, though she had no idea what to say to a man like him, a man whose reputation suggested he dealt in fear rather than grief. "You painted her exact face," Dante continued, his eyes still locked on the canvas. "Down to the way her hair falls over her shoulder. I have not seen anyone recreate that so precisely, not photographers, not artists we hired for memorial pieces after she passed. How is that possible if you never knew her?" "I don't know," Alina said honestly. "I wish I could explain it. All I know is that she keeps coming back to me, and every time I feel like she's trying to tell me something, but I never understand what." Dante was quiet for a long moment, studying the painting with an intensity that made Alina feel as though she were intruding on something deeply private. When he finally spoke again, his voice had lost its earlier sharpness, replaced by something more careful, more uncertain. "I need to know more," he said. "About the dreams, about this shop, about you. Something is not right here, and I do not believe in coincidences." "What about the debt?" Alina asked, still bracing herself for the worst. "Are you still taking the shop?" Dante looked at her, and for the first time since he had walked in, something in his expression softened, just slightly. "The shop is not going anywhere today," he said. "Not until I understand why my sister's face is staring back at me from your easel." Alina did not know whether to feel relieved or more afraid. The threat of losing her shop had lifted, at least for now, but in its place was something far stranger and more dangerous. A connection between her art and a family she knew nothing about. A family with a reputation for violence and secrets buried deep enough that even the police had stopped asking questions. "I want to see the other paintings," Dante said. "The ones you mentioned, the earlier attempts." Alina nodded slowly and walked toward the storage room at the back of the shop, aware of him following close behind her, his presence filling the small space in a way that made the air feel thinner. She pulled out 2 canvases from behind a stack of empty frames, both showing the same woman in different stages of incompletion, the same unfinished eyes, the same garden fading into shadow behind her. Dante studied each one carefully, his expression unreadable, though Alina could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his breathing had changed since he first saw the painting on the easel. He reached into his coat and pulled out his phone, scrolling until he found a photograph, then held it up beside the canvas for comparison. Alina looked at the photograph and felt a chill run through her. It was Isabel Calloway, smiling in what looked like a garden, her dark hair falling exactly the way Alina had painted it, again and again, without ever having seen this image before in her life. "This is not a coincidence," Dante said quietly. Something happened to my sister that nobody has been able to explain, and somehow you have been painting pieces of it without knowing why." Alina felt a mixture of fear and fascination wash over her. Whatever she had stumbled into, there was no walking away from it now. Not with this man standing in her shop, staring at his sister's ghost captured in unfinished charcoal, refusing to let the mystery go unanswered. She thought briefly of her mother, of the countless evenings spent at this very counter learning how to mix color, how to see light before it fell across a canvas. Her mother had always told her that a true painting held more truth than any photograph, because it came from somewhere deeper than the eyes alone. Alina had never fully understood what she meant until this moment, standing across from a stranger whose grief matched the ache she still carried for her own loss. "Your mother," Dante said suddenly, as though reading her thoughts. "Did she ever paint from dreams the way you do?" "Sometimes," Alina admitted. "She used to say that some pictures come looking for the person who can finish them. I always thought it was just something she said to make painting feel more special. I never imagined it might be true." Dante studied her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. "In my world, people do not believe in things like fate," he said quietly. "We believe in leverage, in debts, in what can be proven. But standing here, looking at my sister's face on your easel, I am no longer certain what to believe." "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely steady. Dante turned to face her fully, his eyes carrying a weight she had not seen in him before, something between grief and determination. "Now," he said, "you and I are going to find out the truth. Whether you like it or not, you are already part of this." Outside the shop window, the streetlights flickered on as evening settled over the city, and neither of them noticed the black car parked across the street, or the man inside it watching the shop with quiet, careful attention, waiting to see exactly how long Dante Calloway would stay. Alina did not sleep that night. She sat on the edge of her bed with the lamp still on, replaying every second of the encounter in her mind. The way Dante Calloway's voice had cracked when he asked about the painting, the way his hands had trembled ever so slightly before he caught himself and hid it. She had heard stories about him, about the Calloway family and the shadow they cast over half the city, but nothing had prepared her for the raw grief she saw in his eyes. By morning, she told herself it had all been a strange dream, that a man like Dante Calloway would not return to a small art shop over a painting. But when she unlocked the front door and flipped the sign to open, a black car was already parked outside, and Dante stepped out of it before she had even turned around. "I did not expect you back so soon," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I did not expect to come back at all," Dante replied, stepping past her into the shop. "But I could not stop thinking about what you told me. I need to understand this, properly, from the beginning." Alina closed the door behind him and gestured toward the small table near the window, where she sometimes sat with customers to discuss commissions. Dante sat down across from her, and for a moment, he looked less like the feared man who had walked in yesterday, and more like someone carrying an old wound that had never fully closed. "Tell me about your mother," he said unexpectedly. "You mentioned this shop was hers." Alina blinked, surprised by the question. "She passed away 4 years ago," she said. "She taught me everything I know about painting. This shop was her whole life, and after she was gone, it became mine. I have been trying to keep it running ever since, though it has not been easy." "Did she ever mention my family, the Calloways?" Alina shook her head. "No, never. She kept to herself mostly. Painted portraits for people in the neighborhood, sold small pieces to tourists. I don't think our lives ever crossed paths with people like you." Dante studied her for a long moment, as though searching for a lie in her expression, but found none. "Then explain to me how you paint a woman you have never met, down to the smallest detail, 3 separate times, always incomplete in the exact same way." "I wish I could," Alina said. "I have asked myself the same question every time I wake up from those dreams. It always starts the same way. I am standing in a garden and she is sitting on a bench a few feet away, her back turned slightly. She never speaks. She just sits there, waiting like she wants me to see something, but I never get close enough before I wake up. Dante leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. My sister loved gardens. She used to spend hours in the one behind our family home, painting flowers, reading books, hiding from the rest of us when she wanted peace. His voice grew quieter. She died in that garden. They said she fell and hit her head near the old stone fountain. No witnesses, no evidence of anything else. Case closed within a week. You don't believe that's what happened, Alina said softly. I never did, Dante admitted. But everyone around me insisted it was an accident, and eventually I stopped pushing. My father wanted it closed quickly, before it brought attention to matters he preferred kept private. I let it go because I did not have proof of anything else, only a feeling that would not leave me alone. Alina felt a strange pull toward him in that moment, not because of his wealth or his reputation, but because of the quiet ache in his voice, the same ache she carried whenever she thought about her mother's empty chair in the shop. Grief had a way of making strangers feel familiar. Alina thought of the countless nights she had woken with paint under her fingernails, unable to remember falling asleep at her easel, only the compulsion that had pulled her there in the darkness. She had never told anyone how strange it felt, how the brush sometimes seemed to move on its own before her conscious mind caught up with what her hand had already begun. Maybe that's why I keep painting her, Alina said. Maybe she is trying to tell someone what really happened, and somehow I became the one who could hear it. Dante's eyes met hers, sharp and searching. If that is true, then we need to figure out what she is trying to say before whoever hurt her decides you have gotten too close to the truth. The weight of his words settled over the shop like a shadow. Alina had not considered danger to herself in all of this, only the strangeness of her dreams, and the shock of meeting the man from her paintings shadowed history. But Dante's warning reminded her that his world was not gentle, that people who threatened the secrets of powerful families rarely walked away unharmed. Who would have wanted to hurt your sister? Alina asked carefully. Dante's expression hardened. That is what I intend to find out. My family has enemies, rivals who have wanted to weaken us for years. It is possible Isabel became a target simply because she was my sister, a way to hurt me without confronting me directly. Or it is possible the danger came from somewhere closer, somewhere inside our own walls. You think someone in your family was involved? I do not know, Dante said, his jaw tightening. But I intend to find out, and you are going to help me, whether that puts you at risk or not. Alina felt a flicker of fear at his blunt honesty, but beneath it was something else, a pull of curiosity and purpose she had not felt in years. Ever since her mother died, she had been going through the motions, keeping the shop alive out of obligation rather than passion. This felt different. This felt like something that mattered. What do you need from me? She asked. Paint her again, Dante said. Try to remember more. Every detail, every fragment. If your dreams are somehow connected to what happened to her, then they might be the only lead I have left after 3 years of dead ends. Alina nodded slowly, though the thought of returning to those dreams on purpose sent a chill through her. She had always painted the woman because she felt compelled to, not because she wanted to relive whatever fragment of memory or vision kept finding her in the night. But if it could help uncover the truth about a woman who had died without answers, she owed it to her, and perhaps to herself, to try. Over the following days, Dante visited the shop each afternoon, watching quietly as Alina worked on a new canvas, her brush moving with more purpose than before. She began to notice new details in her dreams, things she had never remembered before. A stone fountain with cracked edges, a wrought iron gate at the far end of the garden, a second figure, barely visible in the shadows near the tree line, watching Isabel from a distance. There's someone else in the garden, Alina told Dante one evening, her hands trembling slightly as she added rough strokes of shadow near the edge of the canvas. I couldn't see a face, just an outline standing near the trees watching her. Dante's expression darkened immediately. Male or female? I think male, Alina said. Tall, standing very still like he didn't want to be noticed. Dante stood and paced toward the window, his hands clasped behind his back, his mind clearly working through possibilities Alina could not begin to guess at. There were only a handful of people who had access to that garden, he said finally. Family, close staff, a few trusted associates. If someone was standing there watching her, it was someone she should have been able to trust. Do you have any idea who it could be? Dante hesitated, and for a moment, Alina saw something flicker across his face, an old suspicion he had never voiced aloud. There is one person, he said slowly. Victor Lang. He worked closely with my father for years, practically raised alongside our family. I never had reason to doubt him, but something about the timeline never sat right with me. He was the last person to see Isabel before she died, and his account of that evening never quite matched what I remembered from her mood earlier that day. Alina felt a shiver run down her spine at the mention of a name so close to Dante's inner circle. If the person watching Isabel in the garden truly was someone trusted, someone still walking freely within Dante's world, then whatever had happened to his sister had never truly been resolved, only buried. You should be careful who you tell about this, Alina warned. If he really was involved and he finds out you're investigating again. I know, Dante said grimly, which is why no one outside this shop can know what we are doing. Not yet, not until we have something solid. One afternoon, while Dante was away handling family business, an older woman named Margaret Owens, who ran the flower shop 2 doors down, stopped by with a small bouquet, as she often did to check on Alina since her mother's passing. I saw that car outside your shop again, Margaret said carefully, setting the flowers on the counter. The black one. People are starting to talk, Alina. That man who comes here, everyone knows the name Calloway around this city, and it is not spoken kindly. Alina forced a small smile, unwilling to worry her longtime neighbor with the truth of what had unfolded. It's just business, she said. Nothing to worry about. Margaret's expression remained doubtful. Your mother would want me to look out for you, she said gently. Just be careful, dear. Men like that do not visit shops like ours without reason, and the reasons are rarely good ones. After Margaret left, Alina stood alone in the quiet shop, turning the old woman's warning over in her mind. She knew the danger was real, had felt it the moment Dante's men first walked through her door, yet something about the fragile, grieving man who had returned each day since felt entirely separate from the reputation that preceded him. She wondered, not for the first time, whether she was being foolish to trust him at all. That evening, when Dante returned, she found herself watching him more closely than before, searching for some sign of the ruthlessness people whispered about. Instead, she found him standing quietly before the painting, his shoulders slightly bowed, as though the weight of memory pressed physically upon him. Can I ask you something, she said carefully, about your family, about what it was like growing up the way you did? Dante's expression grew distant. My father built everything we have through fear, he said slowly. He taught us early that softness was a weakness that got people killed. Isabel was the only one of us who never fully accepted that lesson. She loved beauty, gardens, poetry, things my father considered useless. I think that is partly why I could never quite let go of the idea that her death was not simply an accident. She was too careful, too aware of the world she had been raised in, to wander somewhere dangerous without reason. She sounds like she didn't belong in that world, Alina said softly. No, Dante agreed. She didn't. Sometimes I wonder if that is why she is reaching for you instead of me. Perhaps she always trusted people who lived outside those walls more than she trusted her own family. The quiet vulnerability in his voice settled something between them, a fragile understanding neither had expected to find in each other. Alina reached across the table, resting her hand lightly over his, and for a moment, neither of them pulled away. As the days passed, their conversations shifted beyond the investigation, weaving into quieter moments that neither of them expected. Dante began arriving earlier than necessary, staying longer than the painting required. He asked Alina about her own life, her mother, the years she spent learning to paint at her side. Alina, in turn, found herself curious about the man beneath the cold reputation, the brother who still grieved a sister he could not save, the son who carried burdens few people ever saw. One evening, as rain tapped softly against the shop windows, Dante watched Alina clean her brushes in silence, the events of the day settling heavily between them. "You did not have to help me with this," he said quietly. "I came here to take your shop, and instead, you have given me the first real lead I have had in 3 years." "I couldn't ignore it," Alina said, setting the brushes aside. "Even before I knew who she was, I felt like she needed someone to listen. Now that I know her story, I can't just walk away." Dante studied her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. "Most people in my life want something from me," he said. "Protection, money, favors. You have not asked me for anything, not even to forgive the debt." Alina managed a small, tired smile. "Maybe I'm not most people." "No," Dante said quietly, his gaze lingering on her a moment longer than necessary. "You are not." Outside, the rain continued to fall, blurring the streetlights into soft halos against the darkened glass. Neither of them noticed the same black car from days before, parked once more across the street, its driver watching the warm light spilling from the shop window with quiet, calculating patience. A week passed, and the shop that once struggled for customers now felt like the quiet center of something far larger than Alina had ever imagined. She found herself waking earlier, eager to return to the canvas, eager to see what new fragment of memory might surface from her dreams. But with every new detail she uncovered, the sense of unease around her grew heavier, as though the walls of the shop had grown thinner, less able to protect her from whatever was creeping closer. Dante noticed the change too. He arrived one afternoon to find the shop's front window cracked, a jagged line running from corner to corner, though nothing appeared to have been taken. Alina stood near the counter, arms wrapped around herself, her face pale. "When did this happen?" Dante asked, his voice low and controlled, though Alina could see the tension coiling beneath his calm exterior. "This morning," she said. "I stepped out to get coffee, and when I came back it was like this. Nothing is missing, no note, nothing, just the crack." Dante moved closer to examine the damage, running his fingers along the fractured glass. "This was not an accident," he said. "Someone wanted you to know they were watching." Alina's stomach twisted with fear. Who would do this? "I do not know yet," Dante admitted. "But word travels fast in my world. If people have noticed I have been spending time here, asking questions, digging into old matters, they may be trying to send a message, either to me or to you directly." "To me," Alina's voice rose slightly. "I have nothing to do with any of this. I just paint." "You paint the one thing that might expose whoever hurt my sister," Dante said grimly. "In my world, that makes you a target, whether you asked for that role or not." Alina sank into the chair near the window, her earlier excitement replaced with a cold knot of fear. She had agreed to help Dante out of empathy, out of a strange connection to a woman she had never met, but she had not fully understood what it would mean to stand this close to danger, danger that did not care whether she was innocent or informed. "I should call someone to fix the window," she said quietly, trying to steady herself. "I will send someone," Dante said. "And starting today, there will be someone watching this shop at all times. I am not taking chances." "You're putting guards outside my shop?" Alina asked, startled. "I am protecting what matters," Dante said simply, and something in the way he said it made Alina's chest tighten with an emotion she was not ready to name. Over the following days, a quiet, watchful presence settled around the shop. A man named Marcus Webb, one of Dante's most trusted associates, took up position across the street each morning, his eyes scanning the sidewalk with practiced discretion. Elena found his presence both comforting and unsettling, a constant reminder of how far this had all spiraled beyond the simple debt collection that had started it. Dante continued visiting each afternoon, watching Elena work on the canvas that slowly revealed more of the mysterious garden and the shadowed figure lurking near its edges. One evening, as she added delicate lines to the fountain's cracked stone base, she paused, her brush hovering mid-stroke. "There's something else," she said. "I saw it clearly this time, a necklace around her neck, small silver with a pendant shaped like a bird." Dante's face went still. "A sparrow," he said quietly. "I gave that to her for her 18th birthday. She never took it off." "Was it found with her?" Elena asked gently. Dante shook his head slowly. "No, it was never recovered. My father assumed it had been lost somewhere in the garden during the fall, but we searched for weeks and never found it." "Maybe it wasn't lost," Elena said carefully. "Maybe someone took it." Dante's jaw tightened, and Elena could see the weight of new suspicion settling over him. If someone took that necklace, it means they were close enough to touch her before help arrived. It means whoever found her first was not trying to save her. They were trying to hide something. The implications hung heavy in the air between them. Elena set her brush down, her hands trembling slightly. "Victor Lang," she said. "You said he was the last person to see her that night." "I need to look into his movements more carefully," Dante said, his voice hardening with resolve. Quietly, "If he is involved, I cannot risk alerting him before I have proof." Before returning to the shop that evening, Dante took Elena to a quiet records office on the edge of the city, where an old contact of his family owed him a favor few would refuse. The clerk, a thin man with tired eyes, pulled a set of dusty employment files from a locked cabinet without a single question, sliding them across the counter before disappearing into the back room. "Victor Lang," Dante read aloud, scanning the papers carefully. "Hired by my father 20 years ago. No family listed. No permanent address before joining our household staff." He frowned, flipping through the pages. "It is strange. A man that close to my family for 2 decades, and there is almost nothing here about who he was before he arrived." "Maybe that's exactly why he was so trusted," Elena suggested. "No history means no complications, no outside loyalties to question." "Or it means whatever history he had was worth hiding," Dante said grimly, setting the file down. "I need to know more about where he came from and why my father never questioned it." They spent the following hour combing through what little documentation existed, Elena's sharp eye catching a small, easily overlooked detail buried within a financial ledger. A series of transfers made from a private account under Victor's management, routed through the estate's gardening budget in amounts too precise to be coincidental. "Look at this," she said, sliding the ledger toward Dante. "These payments started almost a year before Isabel died, and they stopped completely the same month." Dante's jaw tightened as he studied the numbers. "This was not simple theft," he said. "This looks deliberate, sustained. If Isabel discovered this and confronted him about it, that could easily explain a motive neither of us had considered before." "So it wasn't just an argument that went wrong," Elena said quietly. "It might have been something he needed to protect at any cost." "Money," Dante said, disgust coloring his voice. "My sister died protecting the truth about money he stole from our own family, hidden inside accounts meant to maintain a garden she loved more than anything else in that house." As the investigation deepened, so did the bond growing between them, quiet and unspoken, built through shared danger and long evenings spent piecing together fragments of a mystery neither of them could walk away from. Elena found herself looking forward to Dante's visits in ways that had nothing to do with the case, moments where his guarded expression would soften slightly when she made an offhand joke, or when he would linger a little longer than necessary after the day's discoveries were finished. One evening, after Marcus had confirmed the street was clear and the shop was locked for the night, Dante lingered by the door instead of leaving right away. "You should not be alone here," he said. "Not with everything that has happened." "I've lived alone above the shop for years," Elena said. "I'll be fine." "That was before someone cracked your window as a warning," Dante said, his voice firm but not unkind. "I would feel better if you stayed somewhere safer, at least until we understand who we are dealing with." Elena hesitated, torn between independence and the very real fear that had settled into her chest since the incident. "Where would I even go?" "I have a property outside the city," Dante said. "Quiet, secure, far from prying eyes. You would be safe there while we continue looking into this." Elena studied him for a long moment, weighing the offer against every instinct that told her getting closer to Dante Calloway meant stepping further into a world she barely understood. But fear, and something else she was reluctant to name, tipped the balance. "All right," she said quietly, "I'll go." Marcus drove them, his eyes flicking constantly to the mirrors, checking the streets behind them with practiced patience. Elena studied him quietly from the back seat, curious about the man who had become a near-constant presence around her since the window had cracked. "How long have you worked for Dante?" she asked. "Since we were boys," Marcus said, a small, rare smile touching his mouth. "He pulled me out of a bad situation when we were both 16, and I have been at his side ever since. Most people see the business and think loyalty here is bought. It is not, not with him." "He seems different from what people say about his family," Elena said carefully. Marcus glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "He carries more weight than anyone realizes," he said. "Losing Isabel nearly broke him. I have not seen him fight for anything the way he has fought for the truth these past weeks, not in years. Whatever is happening between you two, I have not seen him this alive in a long time." Elena said nothing, though the words settled warmly in her chest, staying with her through the rest of the quiet drive. The property Dante brought her to sat far from the noise of the city, surrounded by tall trees and a quiet stillness that felt worlds away from the cracked glass and shadowed streets of her shop. Inside, the house was simple but elegant, filled with warm light and a silence that felt safe rather than empty. Elena stood in the entryway, taking in her surroundings, while Dante watched her with quiet attentiveness. "You'll be safe here," he said. "Marcus and a few others will be nearby, keeping watch." "Thank you," Elena said softly, "for all of this. I know none of this is what you expected when you walked into my shop." Dante's expression shifted, something vulnerable flickering behind his usually guarded eyes. "No," he agreed. "It was not. But I do not regret it. Whatever happens with Victor, whatever we uncover about Isabel, I am grateful you were the one who painted her face. I do not think I could have found this path without you." The quiet sincerity in his voice caught Elena off guard, and for a moment the distance between them felt smaller than it had ever been. She wanted to say something in return, something that captured the strange, unexpected connection that had grown between them over the past weeks, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she simply said, "I'm glad I could help." Dante studied her for a long moment, as though he wanted to say more, but eventually stepped back toward the door. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow, we start looking into Victor's history more closely. If he was involved, I intend to find every piece of evidence before I confront him." That night, Elena lay awake in the unfamiliar bedroom, her mind replaying the events of the past weeks. The debt collection that had turned into an investigation. The painting that had unearthed a dead woman's secrets, the dangerous man who had become, against every expectation, someone she trusted. She drifted into sleep eventually, and the garden returned to her dreams once more, clearer than ever before. This time, Isabel turned slightly, her face still shadowed, but her hand lifted toward the tree line, pointing, as though urging Elena to look closer at the figure hidden among the branches. Elena strained to see, but the dream shifted before she could make out any features, dissolving into the quiet darkness of sleep. She woke with a gasp, sitting upright in the unfamiliar bed, the image of Isabel's pointing hand seared into her mind. She hurried downstairs, still in her nightclothes, and found Dante already awake, seated at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee untouched in front of him, dark circles beneath his eyes suggesting he had not slept much either. She pointed, Alina said breathlessly. In the dream tonight she pointed toward someone in the trees. I think she wants me to see his face. Dante stood immediately, his exhaustion replaced by sharp focus. Then we need to figure out how to help you get there, he said. Whatever is blocking that image, we need to break through it before Victor realizes we are closing in. As dawn broke over the quiet property, casting golden light across the trees outside the window, Alina felt the weight of the days ahead settle over her, heavy with danger and uncertain answers. But for the first time since the investigation began, she also felt something steady beside her, a partnership forged in grief and determination, one that neither of them had expected, but neither of them was willing to let go. Later that morning, Marcus arrived with news that darkened the mood instantly. "There's movement," he said. "Alden Frost's people have been asking questions around the old Calloway estate. They know something is being looked into again." Dante's expression turned to stone. "Alden Frost," he repeated, the name carrying old, bitter history. "My family's oldest rival. If he senses weakness in us now, he will use it, whether or not he had anything to do with Isabel's death." "Do you think he's connected?" Alina asked. "I do not know," Dante admitted. "But I know he will exploit this if given the chance. We need to move carefully and quickly before this becomes something far more dangerous than uncovering the truth about my sister." Alina felt the fragile safety of the quiet house begin to crack under the weight of looming threats from multiple directions. A rival family circling like vultures, a possible traitor hidden within Dante's own inner circle, and an investigation that had already drawn unwanted attention. Yet despite the fear tightening in her chest, she found herself unwilling to step back now, unwilling to abandon the truth that Isabel's spirit seemed determined to reveal through her paintings. Marcus glanced between them, a flicker of quiet approval crossing his usually composed features before he turned back toward the window, scanning the tree line out of old habit. "I will increase the watch around the property tonight," he said. "If Frost's people try anything before we are ready, I want us prepared." Dante nodded, already turning his focus back to the ledger of names and dates spread across the table, cross-referencing Victor's known movements against the fragments Alina had painted from her dreams. "We need to find out exactly how much Victor stole and where the rest of the money went," he said. "If Frost has somehow learned about the missing funds, he may be circling for more than just old rivalry. He may want a piece of what Victor hid." "Do you think they're working together?" Alina asked, unease settling deeper into her chest. "I do not know," Dante admitted, "but I intend to find out before either of them realizes how close we truly are to the truth." "Then we don't stop," Alina said firmly. "We find out what happened to her, no matter who tries to stand in the way." Dante looked at her with something close to admiration, the ghost of a smile touching his lips for the first time in days. "No," he agreed quietly. "We don't stop." 2 days later, Alina insisted on returning to the shop, unwilling to let fear keep her from the one place that still felt entirely her own. Dante argued against it at first, but eventually agreed, on the condition that Marcus remained stationed outside at all times, and that she returned to the safe house each evening before dark. The moment she stepped through the familiar door, the smell of paint and old wood wrapped around her like a warm embrace, and for a brief moment, the danger of the past week felt distant, almost unreal. She spent the morning restocking supplies, humming softly to herself as sunlight spilled across the newly repaired window, determined to reclaim some sense of normalcy amid the chaos. It did not last. Just after noon, the bell above the door rang, and two men Alina did not recognize stepped inside. They were dressed casually, unremarkable at first glance, but something about the way they moved, calculated and alert, sent a cold warning through her chest. "Can I help you find something?" she asked, keeping her voice steady despite the unease crawling up her spine. "We're just looking," the taller of the two said, his eyes drifting across the shop with far more interest in the layout than in any of the paintings on display. "Nice place. Word is Dante Calloway has taken quite an interest in it lately." Alina's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. "I wouldn't know anything about that." The second man smiled, though it did not reach his eyes. "Funny, because we heard he's been spending an awful lot of time here, practically every day from what people say." He stepped closer, studying the canvases stacked near the back wall. "You wouldn't happen to be working on something special for him, would you? Something involving his family?" Alina's mouth went dry. She glanced toward the window, relieved to see Marcus's familiar figure across the street, though he had not yet noticed the tension building inside the shop. "I don't discuss my clients' commissions," she said firmly, forcing steadiness into her voice. "If you're not here to buy anything, I'll have to ask you to leave." The taller man's smile faded, replaced by something colder. "Alden Frost sends his regards," he said quietly. "He wanted you to know he is very interested in whatever you and Mr. Calloway have been working on. He would hate for something valuable to be damaged before he gets a chance to see it." Before Alina could respond, the shop door swung open again and Marcus stepped inside, his presence immediately shifting the atmosphere of the room. "Gentlemen," he said calmly, though his tone carried an unmistakable edge, "I think it's time you left." The two men exchanged a glance, clearly weighing their options, before the taller one shrugged and turned toward the door. "Just passing along a message," he said, glancing back at Alina one last time. "Tell Calloway that Frost is watching closely." The bell rang again as they exited, leaving Alina trembling behind the counter, her heart pounding against her ribs. Marcus moved quickly, locking the door behind them and pulling the blinds closed. "Are you all right?" he asked, his usually composed demeanor cracking slightly with concern. "I'm fine," Alina said, though her voice betrayed the fear still coursing through her. "They mentioned Alden Frost. They said he's watching us." Marcus's jaw tightened. "I need to call Dante immediately." Within the hour, Dante arrived at the shop, his expression carrying a barely controlled fury that Alina had not seen from him before. He crossed the room in a few quick strides, stopping in front of her, his eyes searching her face for any sign of harm. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. "No," Alina said. "They didn't touch me, they just wanted to send a message." Dante's hands clenched at his sides. "Frost is testing boundaries," he said, more to himself than to her. "He would not risk direct confrontation without reason. This means he suspects we are closer to something than I realized, or he wants to provoke a reaction he can use against me." "What does this mean for the investigation?" Alina asked. "It means we need to move faster," Dante said grimly. "And it means you are not staying here any longer, not with Frost's people watching this closely." Alina wanted to argue, wanted to insist on her independence, but the memory of those two men standing in her shop, calm and threatening, silenced any protest. She nodded instead, gathering a few essential supplies before following Dante and Marcus out to the waiting car. That evening, back at the quiet property outside the city, Dante paced the length of the living room while Alina sat curled on the couch. Still shaken from the encounter, "I should never have let this drag you into danger," Dante said, his voice heavy with guilt. "This was never supposed to put your life at risk." "You didn't force me into anything," Alina said quietly. "I chose to help. I still choose to help even now." Dante stopped packing, turning to look at her, something raw and unguarded flickering across his face. "Why?" he asked. "You have every reason to walk away from this, from me, from all of it. Why stay? Alina considered the question carefully before answering. Because Isabel deserves the truth, she said. And because somewhere along the way this stopped being just about the paintings. It became about you, about wanting to see this through, no matter how dangerous it's become. The room fell silent, the space between them charged with an intensity neither of them had fully acknowledged until now. Dante crossed the room slowly, sitting beside her on the couch, close enough that Alina could feel the warmth radiating from him despite the chill of fear still lingering in her chest. I have spent years building walls around myself, Dante admitted quietly. Losing Isabel taught me that caring about anyone only invites more pain. But since you walked into this, since I saw that painting, I have not been able to keep those walls standing the way I used to. Alina's breath caught at the vulnerability in his voice, so different from the cold, composed man who had first walked into her shop with intentions of taking everything she had. Maybe some walls are meant to come down, she said softly. Tell me about her, Alina said softly, wanting to understand more of the man sitting beside her. Isabel, not the version connected to the investigation, just her as your sister. A faint, wistful smile touched Dante's mouth. She used to sneak into the kitchen at midnight and steal sweets before dinner, then blame it on me when our father asked, he said. She had this laugh that filled the entire house, even on the worst days. She wanted to open a small flower shop of her own one day, far away from all of this. I used to tease her about it, tell her our family did not belong in ordinary lives. I regret that more than almost anything now. She sounds like she would have loved my shop, Alina said gently. She would have adored it, Dante said, his voice thick with quiet emotion. I think that is part of why I could not walk away once I saw her face on your canvas. It felt like she had led me somewhere she always wanted to be. Alina's chest tightened with the tenderness of the moment, the walls between them continuing to soften with every shared memory. Maybe she still is, she said softly, leading you somewhere you needed to be. Dante's hand reached up, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. You make it difficult to remember why I built them in the first place, he murmured. For a long moment, neither of them moved, the quiet intimacy of the space wrapping around them like a fragile, unspoken promise. But before either could bridge the remaining distance, Marcus's voice cut through the stillness from the doorway. Dante, he said urgently, you need to see this. The moment shattered, and Dante rose quickly, his expression shifting back into sharp focus as he followed Marcus toward the study. Alina trailed behind them, her heart still racing from the interrupted moment, and found the two men gathered around a laptop screen displaying a grainy security recording. This is from 3 years ago, Marcus explained. Footage from the security camera near the garden gate, the night Isabel died. I finally managed to recover it from the old archives. Dante leaned forward, his eyes locked on the screen as the recording began to play. The footage showed the garden bathed in shadow, the stone fountain barely visible in the low light. A figure moved through the frame, tall and familiar, walking briskly toward the tree line where Isabel's silhouette could be seen sitting near the bench. Alina's breath caught as the figure paused near the trees, exactly where her dreams had always placed the mysterious watcher, before stepping into a sliver of moonlight that briefly illuminated his face. Dante's entire body went rigid. That's him, he said, his voice barely a whisper, thick with disbelief and fury. That's Victor. The recording continued for only a few more seconds before cutting to static, but it was enough. Victor Lang, standing near the very spot where Isabel had died, mere moments before the incident that had been ruled an accident for 3 long years. Before anyone could speak further, Dante's phone buzzed on the desk beside the laptop. He glanced at the screen, and his expression hardened instantly at the unfamiliar number. He answered on speaker, his voice carefully controlled. "Calloway," he said. "Dante, came a smooth, unhurried voice on the other end. Alden Frost. I trust my associates delivered my message earlier at that charming little art shop. Alina's stomach tightened at the sound of the name. The man Dante had warned her about, circling closer than either of them had wanted to admit. You have no business with that shop, or with anything happening inside my family, Dante said, his voice cold and even, though Alina could see the tension coiled through his shoulders. On the contrary, Frost said pleasantly, weakness in the Calloway name is very much my business. It always has been. I simply wanted you to know I am watching closely, curious to see how deep this investigation of yours runs, and whether it might finally give me the opening I have waited years to find. Stay away from her, Dante said sharply. This has nothing to do with our families. Everything has to do with our families, Dante, Frost replied, his tone turning colder. You would do well to remember that before you get too comfortable with your little painter. The call ended abruptly, leaving a heavy silence in the study. Marcus exhaled slowly, glancing between Dante and Alina. He is testing the waters, he said, probing to see how you react. We need to assume he already knows more than he is letting on. Dante's hands curled into fists at his sides, frustration and fear warring visibly across his face. I will not let him use her as leverage against me, he said firmly. Whatever it takes, she stays protected. Alina felt a chill settle over her at the certainty in his voice, the realization sinking in fully for the first time that she had become entangled in a conflict far larger than a single family's grief, one that stretched across years of rivalry and old, unresolved power struggles she barely understood. Dante replayed the footage a second time, then a third, as though he needed to burn the image into his memory beyond any possibility of doubt. Alina watched him carefully, aware of how much this single, grainy recording had just changed everything he believed about the past 3 years of his life. We have him, Marcus said quietly. This is proof he was there, exactly when he claimed to have already left. Dante's hands trembled with restrained anger as he stared at the frozen image on the screen. 3 years, he said. 3 years he sat across from me at family gatherings, offered condolences, pretended to grieve alongside us, while knowing exactly what happened that night. Alina placed a gentle hand on his arm, feeling the tension coiled beneath his skin. This is what we needed, she said softly. This is the truth Isabel wanted us to find. Dante looked at her, something fierce and resolute settling into his expression. Now we need to find out why, he said. And we need to be very careful about how we confront him, because a man capable of hiding this for 3 years will not hesitate to protect himself if he feels cornered. Outside the window, the night had grown deep and quiet, but the danger surrounding them had only sharpened, drawing closer with every piece of evidence they uncovered. Alina felt the weight of what was coming settle over her, heavy and inevitable, yet beside Dante, she found a steadiness she had not expected to feel amid such danger, a quiet certainty that whatever happened next, they would face it together. The days that followed the discovery of the security footage passed in a blur of careful planning and mounting tension. Dante refused to confront Victor directly without more evidence, aware that a man who had hidden his involvement for 3 years would not crumble easily, and any misstep could give him the chance to disappear entirely, or worse, retaliate before the truth could ever come to light. Alina continued painting, though the dreams had shifted again, growing more vivid, more urgent, as though Isabel sensed how close they had come to the truth. One night, a new detail emerged, a name spoken faintly in the dream, carried on the wind through the garden like a whispered secret. Grace, Alina said the next morning, sitting across from Dante at the kitchen table, her voice still shaky from the intensity of the dream. I heard a name, Grace. Isabel said it right before the dream ended. Dante frowned, searching his memory. Grace Bennett, he said slowly. She used to work as a housekeeper at the estate. She left shortly after Isabel's death, moved away without much explanation. I always assumed it was grief. Do you think she saw something? Alina asked. It's possible, Dante said. If she was still at the estate that evening, she may have witnessed more than she ever told anyone. I need to find her. Marcus located Grace Bennett within 2 days, living quietly in a small town several hours outside the city, working as a seamstress under a different last name. Dante and Alina traveled together to meet her, Marcus following at a discreet distance to ensure their safety. Grace answered the door hesitantly, her expression shifting to alarm the moment she recognized Dante's face. "I don't want any trouble," she said quickly, moving to close the door. "Please," Dante said, his voice gentler than Alina had ever heard it. "I am not here to cause trouble. I need to know what happened to my sister. I think you saw something that night." Grace's hands trembled against the door frame, old fear resurfacing in her eyes. After a long, tense silence, she finally stepped back, allowing them inside. "I have carried this for 3 years," Grace admitted once they were seated in her small living room, her voice thick with unshed tears. "I wanted to say something, but I was terrified. Victor Lang made it very clear what would happen if I spoke a single word." Alina felt a chill settle over her at the confirmation of what they had already suspected. Dante's expression remained carefully controlled, though his hands gripped the arms of his chair with white-knuckled tension. "Tell me everything," he said quietly, "please." Grace took a shaky breath before continuing. "I was finishing my evening duties near the garden when I heard raised voices. I recognized Isabel's voice, upset about something, and Victor's voice responding, calm but firm. I didn't think much of it at first. Arguments happened sometimes among family and staff. But then I heard something fall, and Isabel went quiet." Alina's stomach twisted painfully as Grace continued, her voice growing quieter, heavier with the weight of the memory she had kept buried for so long. "I looked through the hedges and saw Victor standing near the fountain and Isabel lying on the ground. He knelt beside her for a moment, and then he reached toward her neck and removed something, a necklace, before standing and walking away without calling for help. I was too afraid to move, too afraid to make a sound. By the time I found the courage to alert someone, it was already too late to save her." Dante's breathing had gone ragged, his eyes closed against the pain of finally hearing the confirmation he had suspected for 3 long years. "Why did you never come forward?" he asked, his voice strained. "Victor found me the next day," Grace said, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "He told me if I ever spoke about what I saw, my family would suffer for it. I had a young daughter at the time. I could not risk her safety, no matter how much guilt I carried for staying silent." Alina reached over, gently taking Grace's trembling hand in her own. "You're doing the right thing now," she said softly. "This can finally bring the truth to light." Grace nodded weakly, wiping at her tears. "I am willing to testify to what I saw if it means Isabel finally gets justice. I have carried this too long." "What made you leave the estate so suddenly?" Alina asked gently, sensing there was more to the story than Grace had yet shared. Grace's hands twisted together in her lap. "A week after it happened, Victor came to my small room near the kitchens," she said. "He didn't threaten me outright, not at first. He simply reminded me how difficult it would be for a woman with a young daughter to find work if certain rumors began circulating about her honesty. He mentioned a position he had heard about in another town, said he had already arranged references for me if I wanted a fresh start." "He was buying your silence," Dante said grimly. "I told myself I was protecting my daughter," Grace said, her voice cracking. "I told myself the truth would not bring Isabel back, that speaking up would only destroy my family for nothing. But I have thought about her every single day since, about the kindness she always showed the staff, when so few others in that house ever did. I owed her more than my silence." Alina squeezed her hand gently. "You're giving her that now," she said. "That matters more than the years you spent afraid." Grace managed a small, watery smile. "I kept something," she admitted suddenly, rising from her chair and moving toward a small wooden box on the shelf near the window. She opened it carefully and withdrew a folded scrap of paper, yellowed with age. I found this near the fountain the morning after, before anyone else came to search the garden. I never understood what it meant, but I could not bring myself to throw it away. Dante took the paper carefully, unfolding it with trembling hands. It was a torn page from a ledger, numbers and initials scrawled hastily across the surface, the handwriting unmistakably Victor's. "This matches the transfers we found in the estate records," Dante said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "This is proof he was moving stolen funds through the garden accounts for months before she died." "I did not know what it meant when I found it," Grace said. "I only knew it felt important enough to keep hidden rather than destroyed." "You may have just given us everything we need," Dante said quietly, gratitude softening the hard edges of his anger. "Thank you, Grace, truly." Dante rose from his chair, packing toward the window, his fists clenched at his sides as he processed the confirmation of Victor's guilt. "He killed her," he said quietly, almost to himself. "For 3 years I sat across from the man who killed my sister, and I never knew." "We have enough now," Marcus said from the doorway, having listened quietly to the confession. "Between the footage and Grace's testimony, we can move forward." Dante turned back to Grace, his expression softening slightly despite the storm of emotion clearly raging beneath his composed exterior. "Thank you," he said, "for finally telling the truth. You and your family will be protected, I promise you that." Before leaving Grace's small home, Dante stepped outside to make a difficult call, one Alina could sense he had been dreading since the truth first began to surface. She watched through the window as he paced slowly across the front yard, phone pressed to his ear, his shoulders tense with the weight of the conversation. "That was my father," he said when he finally returned, his expression unreadable. "I told him everything, the footage, Grace's testimony, the stolen funds. He was silent for a long time." "How did he take it?" Alina asked carefully. "He asked me if I was certain," Dante said. "When I told him yes, he said only one thing. He said he always wondered why Victor insisted on managing the garden accounts himself, when every other financial matter passed through proper channels. He said he ignored the feeling because Victor had been with our family for 20 years, and trust, once given that deeply, is difficult to question." "Is he going to help?" Alina asked. "He has agreed to step back from handling this personally," Dante said. "He knows if he intervenes directly, it will look like the family protecting its own rather than seeking justice. He is leaving this to me, which is not something my father does easily." Alina studied him carefully, sensing the complicated mixture of relief and old resentment beneath his measured words. "Is that difficult for you, having that responsibility now?" "It is what I have wanted for years," Dante admitted. "But I never expected it to come at this cost, or under these circumstances. I always imagined earning more control over the family's affairs through strength, through proving myself in ways my father respected, not through uncovering how badly he failed to protect my sister." "You're not failing her now," Alina said gently. "You're the reason her truth is finally coming out." Dante reached for her hand, his fingers lacing through hers with quiet gratitude. "I could not have done any of this without you," he said. "I want you to know that, regardless of what happens next." The drive back to the city was heavy with silence, Alina watching Dante's clenched jaw and distant gaze, aware of the storm building within him. She reached over gently, placing her hand over his on the seat between them, and he turned to look at her, something fragile and grateful passing between them without need for words. "We're close," Alina said softly. "Isabel's truth is almost fully uncovered." "I need to confront him," Dante said, his voice low and controlled, though Alina could sense the barely restrained fury simmering beneath his calm exterior. "Carefully, before he realizes how close we truly are." But their plans shattered the moment they arrived back at the safe house. Marcus's men were scattered near the entrance, tense and alert, and Dante's expression darkened the instant he saw the broken lock on the front door. "Someone was here," he said, moving quickly inside, Alina close behind him. The house had been searched thoroughly, drawers overturned, papers scattered across the floor, though nothing appeared to have been stolen. Dante's phone rang before he could fully assess the damage, and Alina watched his face pale as he answered, his hand tightening around the device with barely restrained fury. "Where is she?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Alina's heart dropped as she realized what was happening even before Dante turned to look at her, his expression carrying a fear she had never seen from him before. "They have Alina," he said, his voice barely steady, before Alina's confusion turned to horror as she realized the person on the other end of the call was not referring to her at all. "Grace," Alina breathed, understanding dawning with sickening clarity. "They took Grace." Dante's jaw tightened as he listened to the voice on the other end of the line, his knuckles white around the phone. After a tense moment, he lowered it slightly, his eyes meeting Alina's with grim resolve. "Victor knows we found her," he said. "He wants to trade her safety for the footage, and for both of us meeting him alone tonight." Alina's hands felt cold as the weight of the situation settled fully over her. Grace had only just found the courage to speak the truth after years of silence, and now she was paying the price for that courage at the hands of the very man who had threatened her into silence in the first place. "That's a trap," Marcus said immediately. "He'll never let any of you walk away once he has what he wants." "I know," Dante said grimly, "but I cannot leave Grace in his hands, not after everything she has already sacrificed to tell the truth." Alina stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear pounding through her chest. "Then we go in prepared," she said. "We don't walk into his trap blindly. We turn it into ours instead." Dante studied her for a long moment, something like fierce pride flickering behind the worry in his eyes. "This is not your fight," he said quietly. "You do not have to be part of this final confrontation." "I stopped being separate from this the moment I painted her face," Alina said firmly. "I am not walking away now, not when we are this close to the truth." "We need a way to record whatever he says tonight," Alina said suddenly, an idea forming quickly. "If he believes he is trading Grace's safety for the only copies of the footage, he may say more than he intends, thinking there will be no consequences afterward." Marcus nodded slowly, considering the suggestion. "It is risky, but it could give us exactly what we need to ensure this ends in a courtroom rather than in more violence." Dante studied Alina with quiet admiration, some of the tension in his shoulders easing slightly at her steady resolve amid the fear clearly still coursing through her. "You continue to surprise me," he said, "even now." "I told you," Alina said, managing a small, determined smile despite the fear knotting in her stomach. "I'm not walking away from this." Marcus began outlining a plan quickly, positioning his men at strategic points around the meeting location Victor had specified, an abandoned warehouse near the edge of the city, chosen deliberately for its isolation. Dante insisted Alina remain in the car with Marcus during the initial exchange, a compromise she reluctantly agreed to, though every instinct told her the night would not unfold as calmly as anyone hoped. As darkness settled over the city, they made their way toward the warehouse, tension thick enough to choke on inside the car. Dante's expression had hardened into something cold and controlled. The calculating Mafia boss Alina had first encountered weeks ago resurfacing beneath the vulnerability she had come to know in quieter moments. "Whatever happens tonight," Dante said quietly, glancing back at Alina before stepping out of the car, "know that meeting you was the only good thing to come from all of this pain." Alina watched him go, her heart pounding painfully against her ribs, every instinct urging her to follow despite the promise she had made to remain in the car. Marcus settled into the driver's seat beside her, his eyes fixed on the warehouse entrance, one hand resting near the weapon tucked beneath his jacket, ready for whatever the night still had in store. Before Alina could respond, he was gone, disappearing into the shadows toward the warehouse where Victor waited, and the true confrontation was about to begin. Inside the warehouse, dim light spilled from a single hanging bulb, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Victor Lang stood near the center of the space, his posture relaxed, deceptively calm, though his eyes carried a sharp wariness as Dante approached. Grace sat bound to a chair a few feet away, her face pale with fear but otherwise unharmed. "Dante," Victor said, his voice carrying false warmth, "I was hoping we could resolve this like reasonable men." The single bulb overhead swayed slightly, sending shifting shadows across the concrete, and for a moment, the years of grief and unanswered questions seemed to hang suspended in the stale warehouse air between them. "You killed my sister," Dante said, his voice flat and cold, cutting through any pretense of civility. "There is nothing reasonable left to discuss." Victor's expression flickered, the mask of calm slipping slightly. "It was an accident," he said. "Isabel discovered something she should not have, financial records that would have exposed certain arrangements I had made using your family's resources without your father's knowledge. She threatened to tell him everything. I only meant to stop her from making a mistake. I never intended for her to fall." "You took her necklace," Dante said, his voice trembling with barely restrained fury. "You let her die and then walked away, leaving my family to grieve for 3 years while you sat among us, pretending to share our pain." "I panicked," Victor admitted, though his tone lacked genuine remorse, carrying instead the calculated defensiveness of a man cornered by his own lies. "I could not undo what happened, and I could not risk everything I had built by confessing to an accident no one would have believed." "It was not an accident," Dante said, stepping closer, his fists clenched at his sides. "Grace saw everything. You pushed her, and then you stole her necklace before walking away without calling for help." Victor's eyes flickered toward Grace, cold calculation replacing whatever remained of his earlier composure. "Grace should have kept quiet," he said quietly, "just like she has for 3 years." "She kept quiet because you threatened her family," Dante said. "That ends tonight." Victor's hand moved slowly toward his coat, and Dante's own posture shifted instantly, alert and ready, the air in the warehouse growing thick with imminent danger. "I cannot let this become public," Victor said, his voice hardening. "Too much is at stake. Your father's reputation, the family's standing, everything we have built together over the years." "You mean everything you built on lies," Dante said. "I do not care about reputation anymore. I care about the truth and about justice for my sister." Outside, Alina sat tense in the car beside Marcus, watching the warehouse entrance with growing anxiety as minutes stretched painfully long. "Something is wrong," she said finally, unable to sit still any longer. "We need to help him." "Dante gave clear instructions," Marcus said, though his own hand had drifted toward the door handle, clearly sharing her unease. Before either of them could decide, raised voices echoed faintly from within the warehouse, followed by the unmistakable sound of a struggle. Alina's heart lurched, and without waiting for Marcus's permission, she pushed open the car door and ran toward the entrance, ignoring his urgent calls for her to stay back. Inside, she found Dante and Victor locked in a tense standoff, Victor's hand gripping a weapon he had drawn from his coat, aimed unsteadily between Dante and the doorway where Alina now stood frozen in fear. "Alina," Dante said sharply, his eyes widening with alarm at her sudden appearance, "get back outside." Victor's attention shifted toward her, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "The artist," he said, "the one responsible for uncovering all of this. Perhaps you should have stayed hidden in your little shop." Marcus appeared in the doorway behind Alina, his own weapon drawn, quickly assessing the dangerous standoff before him. "Put it down, Victor," he said firmly. This ends now, one way or another. Victor's eyes darted between the three of them, calculating his rapidly diminishing options. For a tense moment, silence stretched through the warehouse, broken only by Grace's quiet, frightened breathing from where she remained bound to the chair. "You have nowhere to go," Dante said, his voice steady despite the danger of the weapon still aimed in his direction. "The footage exists. Grace has already spoken the truth. Whatever happens here tonight, your secret is already exposed." Victor's composure finally cracked, desperation flashing across his face as the weight of his situation became undeniable. In a moment of reckless panic, he lunged toward the doorway, attempting to force his way past Marcus and escape into the night. What followed happened in a blur, Dante moving swiftly to intercept him, the two men grappling fiercely near the warehouse entrance. Alina watched, frozen with fear, as Marcus rushed to assist, the struggle intensifying until finally, with a sharp cry of pain, Victor collapsed to the ground, disarmed and subdued beneath Dante's firm grip. "It's over," Dante said breathlessly, pinning Victor firmly against the concrete floor. "You are finished." Marcus quickly secured Victor's hands, calling for reinforcements to handle the aftermath, while Alina rushed toward Grace, working quickly to untie the ropes binding her to the chair. "You're safe now," Alina said softly, helping the trembling woman to her feet. "It's finally over." Grace collapsed into Alina's arms, tears of relief mixing with the lingering fear of the ordeal, while across the warehouse, Dante stood over Victor's restrained form, his chest heaving with exertion and years of buried grief finally finding release. "Why?" he asked quietly, kneeling beside the man who had shattered his family for 3 long years. "Why did you let us grieve for so long, knowing the truth the entire time?" Victor said nothing, his earlier confidence replaced by hollow defeat, and Dante finally rose, turning away from him entirely, unwilling to grant him the satisfaction of further engagement. Police arrived shortly after Marcus placed the call, drawn by the recorded confession captured discreetly on the device Alina had carried into the warehouse, hidden within the strap of her bag exactly as Marcus had instructed. Victor's protests of innocence crumbled quickly under the weight of his own recorded words, combined with the footage and Grace's testimony, leaving little room for doubt about what he had done 3 years earlier. As officers led Victor away in restraints, he turned back toward Dante one final time, his earlier composure entirely gone, replaced by hollow bitterness. "Your father would have buried this the same way he buried everything inconvenient," he spat. "I only did what I thought necessary to protect what I had built within this family." "You destroyed what mattered most in this family," Dante replied evenly, refusing to grant him the satisfaction of anger. "There is a difference." Grace was released from her restraints and wrapped in a blanket by paramedics who checked her over carefully, finding her shaken but unharmed. Alina stayed close beside her, offering quiet comfort while Dante spoke briefly with the responding detectives, ensuring the evidence would be handled properly and that Grace's cooperation would be protected rather than punished for her years of silence. Later that night, once statements had been taken and the warehouse finally emptied of police and reporters drawn by whispers of the unfolding story, Dante found Alina sitting alone on the hood of Marcus's car, staring up at the quiet night sky. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, settling beside her. "I think so," Alina said, still processing the intensity of everything that had happened. "It's strange. Weeks ago, my biggest worry was whether I could pay off the loan on my shop. Now I have watched a confession unfold in an abandoned warehouse and helped prove a murder 3 years in the making." "You did more than help," Dante said quietly. "You gave Isabel back her voice." Alina leaned her head against his shoulder, exhaustion and relief settling over her in equal measure. "What happens to Victor now?" she asked. "He will face trial," Dante said. With the footage, Grace's testimony, the financial records, and tonight's confession, there is no version of events that lets him walk away from what he did. My family will make certain justice is served properly this time, without any interference. They sat together in comfortable silence for a long while, the weight of the night slowly giving way to something quieter and more peaceful, the first real calm either of them had felt in weeks. The following weeks unfolded in a whirlwind of legal proceedings and quiet resolution. Victor Lang's confession, combined with the recovered footage and Grace's detailed testimony, secured his conviction, finally bringing the closure Dante's family had been denied for 3 painful years. Alden Frost, sensing the shifting tides within the Calloway family's affairs, quietly withdrew his interest, unwilling to entangle himself further in matters that no longer offered the weakness he had hoped to exploit. Alina attended the trial alongside Dante on the final day of proceedings, watching from the gallery as the judge read through the mountain of evidence that had condemned Victor Lang beyond any reasonable defense. Isabel's memory was honored throughout the courtroom testimony, her kindness and her love for the garden she had died, protecting spoken of openly for the first time in 3 years, no longer hidden beneath a false story of accident and misfortune. Dante's father attended as well, seated stiffly near the front of the courtroom, his expression carefully composed, though Alina noticed the way his hands trembled slightly during Grace's testimony, the same hands that had once dismissed his own daughter's death as simple misfortune rather than pursuing the truth further. When the verdict was finally read, guilty on every charge, a heavy silence settled over the courtroom, broken only by Grace's quiet, relieved tears beside Alina. Afterward, in the hallway outside the courtroom, Dante's father approached Alina hesitantly, an unfamiliar softness in his usually stern expression. "I understand my son owes you a great deal," he said, "more than I fully comprehend, though he has tried to explain it to me." "He gave me back my shop when he could have taken it," Alina said simply. "I think we owe each other more than either of us expected." The older man studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind his guarded eyes. "Isabel would have liked you," he said finally, his voice carrying an unexpected weight of emotion. "She always did have a talent for seeing the good in people the rest of us overlooked." The words settled warmly in Alina's chest, a quiet acknowledgement of belonging she had not anticipated receiving from a man whose reputation had once frightened her nearly as much as his son's. Alina returned to her shop, though the quiet danger that had once surrounded it had finally lifted, replaced by a sense of peace she had not felt in years. Dante visited often, though the tension of investigation and danger had softened into something warmer, steadier, built on the foundation of everything they had endured together. One afternoon, as golden light spilled through the shop's front window, Dante arrived carrying a small folder, his expression carrying a seriousness Alina had not seen since the earliest days of their investigation. "What is this?" she asked, setting aside her brush as he placed the folder on the counter before her. "The deed to your shop," Dante said quietly, "free and clear. The debt no longer exists." Alina's eyes widened with surprise. "Dante, I can't accept this. The debt was real. I owe." "You owe nothing," Dante interrupted gently. "You gave me the truth about my sister. You gave me closure I thought I would never find. There is no amount of money that could repay that." Alina studied him for a long moment, overwhelmed by the weight of his generosity and the quiet sincerity behind it. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Dante reached into his coat once more, pulling out a small velvet box, and Alina's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a delicate silver necklace shaped like a sparrow, matching the one described in her paintings. The one Isabel had worn until the night she died. "I had this made," Dante explained, "as a tribute to Isabel and as a thank you to you for bringing her story back into the light. I hope you'll wear it, not as a reminder of what happened, but as a symbol of what her memory helped us find." Alina's eyes filled with quiet tears as she accepted the necklace, the weight of the small pendant settling gently against her collarbone as Dante fastened the clasp behind her neck. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "So is what we built together," Dante said softly, his hand lingering at the nape of her neck before gently turning her to face him. The distance between them, which had lingered unspoken through weeks of danger and quiet longing, finally closed as Dante leaned down, pressing a soft, tender kiss against her lips. Alina melted into the warmth of the moment, every fear and uncertainty of the past weeks dissolving into the quiet certainty of everything they had built together. When they finally parted, Dante rested his forehead gently against hers, a rare, genuine smile spreading across his face. "I came to this shop intending to take everything you had," he murmured. "Instead, you gave me back the truth I had lost, and somewhere along the way, you gave me something I never expected to find again." "What's that?" Alina asked softly. "Hope," Dante said simply, "and love, though I did not recognize it until it was already too late to walk away." Alina smiled, her heart full despite the difficult path that had led them here. "I'm glad you froze," she said quietly, "the moment you saw that painting." Dante laughed softly, the sound warm and unguarded, so different from the cold composure she had first encountered weeks ago. "So am I," he said. "So am I." Later that evening, as the shop grew quiet and the golden light of sunset faded into the soft blue of twilight, Alina stood before the original unfinished portrait, the one that had started everything. She picked up her brush, and for the first time completed Isabel's eyes, rendering them warm and peaceful, finally at rest. Dante stood beside her, watching the final strokes bring the painting to life, his hand resting gently at the small of her back. "Thank you," he whispered, "for finishing her story." Alina leaned into him, her heart steady and full. "Thank you," she replied, "for helping me find mine." Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the quiet resolution that had unfolded within the small art shop. But inside, surrounded by canvases and the lingering scent of paint, two people who had found each other through grief and danger stood together, finally free to build a future neither of them had expected, but both of them had come to cherish completely. 6 months passed, and the small art shop on the corner of the quiet street had transformed into something neither Alina nor the neighborhood had ever expected. Word of the shop's story, carefully softened and stripped of its more dangerous details, had spread through the community, drawing curious visitors eager to see the place where a chance encounter had unfolded into something remarkable. Alina's commissions doubled, then tripled, and for the first time since her mother's passing, the shop thrived not out of necessity, but out of genuine, flourishing success. Dante's presence in her life had settled into something steady and comfortable, though the demands of his family's business still required careful attention. He had used the months following Victor's conviction to quietly restructure many of the family's dealings, distancing himself from the more dangerous corners of the world he had inherited, focusing instead on legitimate ventures that no longer carried the constant threat of violence and betrayal. One crisp autumn morning, Alina arrived at the shop to find a young woman waiting outside, nervously clutching a folded photograph. "I heard you paint portraits," the woman said hesitantly. "From dreams sometimes. Is that true?" Alina smiled gently, memories of her own strange journey settling warmly in her chest. "Sometimes," she said. "Come in and tell me about it." As the woman shared her story, a grandmother she had never met, lost during a difficult time in the family's history, Alina felt the familiar pull of purpose that had defined her work since Isabel first appeared in her dreams. Not every commission carried the weight of hidden truths waiting to be uncovered, but each one felt meaningful in its own way, a small act of connecting people to the ones they had lost. That evening, Dante arrived at the shop just as Alina was closing up, carrying a bouquet of white flowers and a quiet, thoughtful expression that told her something important was on his mind. "You look serious," Alina said, accepting the flowers with a curious smile. Is everything all right? Everything is more than all right, Dante said, guiding her gently toward the back of the shop, where the completed portrait of Isabel now hung in a place of honor near the window. I wanted to talk to you about something. Alina set the flowers down carefully, studying his expression with growing curiosity. What is it? Dante reached into his coat, and for a moment, Alina's heart leapt with anticipation, though what he produced was not the small box she half expected, but rather a folded document, its edges crisp and formal. My father has decided to step back from the family's remaining businesses, Dante explained. He wants me to take full control, to reshape things according to my own vision, rather than continuing the path he built. I have spent the last several months working to move our interests away from anything resembling what took Isabel from us. That's wonderful, Alina said, genuinely proud of the transformation she had witnessed in him since the danger of Victor's betrayal had finally been resolved. What does that mean for us? Dante's expression softened. It means I finally have the freedom to build a life that isn't shadowed by danger or old grudges, he said. A life I would very much like to build with you if you'll have me. Alina's breath caught as understanding dawned, and this time when Dante reached into his coat again, he withdrew the small velvet box she had originally anticipated. He opened it slowly, revealing a delicate ring, simple and elegant, catching the soft evening light spilling through the shop window. Alina Hartley, Dante said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability shining in his eyes. You walked into my life during the darkest chapter of my family's story, and instead of running from the danger surrounding me, you helped me find truth, healing, and a kind of hope I thought I had lost forever. I love you completely and without reservation. Will you marry me? Tears filled Alina's eyes as she looked between the ring and the man who had once walked into her shop intending to take everything from her, only to give her back a purpose and a love she had never expected to find. Yes, she whispered, her voice trembling with joy. Yes, of course. Dante slipped the ring onto her finger, and as their lips met in a soft, joyful kiss, the shop around them seemed to glow with quiet celebration, the paintings on the walls silent witnesses to the culmination of everything they had endured together. News of their engagement spread quickly, and in the weeks that followed, Alina found herself embraced not only by Dante's remaining family, softened considerably since his father's retirement from more dangerous affairs, but also by a growing circle of friends who had watched their story unfold with quiet admiration. Grace, now safely relocated with her daughter under Dante's continued protection, sent a heartfelt letter of congratulations, expressing gratitude for the courage that had finally allowed her to reclaim her own peace after years of silence. Marcus, ever loyal, took on a larger role within Dante's restructured businesses, ensuring the transition away from the family's darker history remained smooth and secure. He visited the shop often, teasing Alina good-naturedly about the unlikely path that had led his once untouchable boss into quiet, contented domesticity. The shop's back wall, once reserved for storage, had slowly transformed into a small gallery space, displaying not only Alina's own work, but pieces from local artists she had begun mentoring, young painters who reminded her of herself before everything changed. Dante often stopped by in the early evenings, watching quietly from the doorway as she guided a nervous student through their first serious commission, pride evident in the soft curve of his smile. Dante's father, too, made an effort neither Alina nor Dante had expected, arriving one Sunday afternoon with a small, carefully wrapped gift, an old set of paintbrushes that had belonged to Isabel, discovered while sorting through boxes long left untouched in the estate's attic. She never had the chance to use these properly, he said, his voice gruff with emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. I think she would want someone who understood her the way you have to have them instead. Alina accepted the brushes with careful reverence, moved by the quiet gesture from a man who had spent decades hiding behind hardened composure. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'll use them well." As preparations for the wedding began to take shape, Alina found herself surrounded by a warmth she had never expected from Dante's world, a family slowly learning to soften around the edges, guided by the lessons Isabel's story had finally taught them all. She chose a small, intimate ceremony, held in the very garden where Isabel had once found her peace, now restored and blooming under careful new attention, the old fountain repaired and running clear once more. On the morning of the wedding, Alina stood before a mirror in a simple, elegant dress, the sparrow necklace resting gently against her collarbone, when Grace arrived unexpectedly, carrying a small bouquet of white flowers gathered from her own garden. "I wanted to see you before the ceremony," Grace said, her eyes glistening with emotion. "I owe so much of my own peace to what you and Dante uncovered. I could not miss this day." "I'm so glad you're here," Alina said, embracing her warmly. "None of this would have happened without your courage." The ceremony itself unfolded beneath a canopy of blooming flowers, sunlight filtering softly through the garden trees as Dante waited at the altar, his expression carrying none of the guarded coldness that had once defined him, replaced entirely by open, unguarded joy. As Alina walked toward him, she felt the quiet presence of Isabel somewhere close, a peaceful warmth settling over the garden that felt like more than simple coincidence. Their vows were simple, heartfelt, built on the truth they had uncovered together and the love that had grown steadily beside it. When Dante finally kissed her before their gathered family and friends, the garden seemed to hold its breath in quiet celebration. The very place that had once witnessed such profound loss now filled instead with hope, renewal, and the promise of everything still waiting to unfold. As winter settled over the city, Alina began work on a new painting, one she had been longing to create since Isabel's story had finally found its resolution. Standing before a fresh canvas, she painted the garden once more, but this time, the image carried none of the shadowed danger of her earlier dreams. Instead, sunlight spilled across the stone fountain, flowers bloomed vibrant and full along the pathways, and Isabel sat peacefully on the bench, her sparrow necklace catching the light, her expression finally at rest. Beside her, Dante watched the painting take shape, his arm wrapped gently around Alina's shoulders. "She looks happy," he said softly, studying his sister's peaceful expression. "She is," Alina said, leaning into him. "I think she has been waiting a long time for someone to help her find peace, and for you to find yours alongside her." Dante pressed a gentle kiss to the top of Alina's head, gratitude and love swelling within him as he considered the unlikely, winding path that had led him to this quiet, contented moment. "I never imagined healing could look like this," he admitted. "Like a shop full of paintings, and a woman brave enough to look closely at things everyone else was too afraid to see." Alina smiled, setting her brush aside as she turned to face him fully. "Sometimes the things we're most afraid of turn out to be the very things that save us," she said. "You were afraid of what that painting meant. I was afraid of what your visit meant for my shop, but look at everything it led to instead." As the final light of evening faded outside the shop window, casting the newly finished garden painting in a warm, golden glow, Dante and Alina stood together, their future finally free of shadows, built instead on truth, courage, and a love neither of them had expected to find amid such darkness. The unfinished portrait that had once frozen a feared Mafia boss in his tracks now hung complete, a quiet symbol of everything they had overcome, and everything still waiting to unfold in the life they had chosen to build together. The shop bell rang softly as a new customer stepped inside, drawn by the warm light and the promise of stories waiting to be told through paint and canvas. And Alina turned to greet them with the same quiet hope that had carried her through everything that came before, ready to welcome whatever new chapter waited next.